last time we met, well, actually, we weren't able to get the technology to work. So most people didn't actually see what was going on. Well, you did miss. We actually went through quite a lot that day. But we'll do a recap. We'll do a recap for everybody. But where we left off with everybody was at the Wedding Church of Cana, which, do I have access to it again? Oh. Okay. Yeah. And so someone asked, do they actually still do weddings here? And the answer is yes. Yes, they do. And so this was a lot of our group that chose to renew their vows. And so my parents were able to, participate with that. So yeah, it was kind of a nice little thing. And they had certificates for everybody, and then the certificates got left on a bench somewhere. And you know how it goes. Okay.
Up by an archaeologist someday.
All right, so from there we went to the fishing village of Capernaum, which is basically on the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus did quite a bit of ministry in this area. In fact, Capernaum is known as part of the Evangelical Triangle with Chorazin and Bethsaida, which you can see on the smaller map here. There's a triangle where he did a lot of his ministry. And so we talked about, some of the things that had taken place there. This village is well known to be the location of where Peter had lived. And one of the stories that came out of this was the healings at Capernaum, where Jesus was invited into the house of Peter, and his mother-in-law was sick, and basically healed her, and she got up and started to serve them. And you can see how, the village was actually pretty well preserved, considering this is all first century material. A lot of basalt that they made the buildings out of. And they reason that this is the house of Peter because this particular building was much smaller in the beginning, but in the 5th and I think it was the 5th century, they found that the walls were expanded into that octagonal space, so it was made more into a communal type of area for people to either worship or do some sort of community events. But they also found that within the walls was graffiti, and specifically they had the words of Peter and Jesus, written within the walls. The village itself, or just that? Yeah. You could probably fit, 10 people in there. I mean, it's not huge. This is bigger.
Well, you said it got turned into an octagon. They added on to that?
Yeah, and so this was part of the original building, but then this was even larger to create the communal space. And then,
kind of like square footage?
yeah, that I don't have offhand.
Think the Little House show.
But I would say, yeah, I mean, kind of the size of the seating here, you could maybe put the chairs in there.
For the bigger space?
For the bigger space, yeah. The smaller space, you could, yeah, maybe 5 people could fit comfortably in that small space.
I think culturally, like, people spent time at home to sleep and maybe eat.
That was it.
But yeah, you spent the rest of your time either working or out and about and doing,
Oh, yeah.
It's like our third world countries are the same. I mean, there's like a one-room shed. Yeah. And then everything else is done outside.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in Middle Eastern countries, the personal space area is less than a foot, whereas we're like 3 feet.
But you'd cook outside, you would. Even the bathrooms or
You know, when I say that there was no privacy, there was no privacy. Even as you moved up in the stations in life, the palace and all that, there's still our ideas. You know, we see on the movies these huge. Go over to Europe and look at the castles. They're small rooms. They're really small rooms. And you find one like this. This is a huge room for that time.
But yeah, you can see the outlines of, you know, some of the housing there, and those were built up a little bit, but then they'd have thatch and mud to create the roof, you know, at the time. And so this is the house of Peter now. So they've built a church on top of the remnants of the old church.
Oh, that's what that was.
Yes, yeah, the foundations built on top of it. And, you know, they were replicating the octagonal space, and they've associated the different pillars, the corners, to be different aspects of Jesus' ministry.
Is it the state of Israel that funds these projects like this, you know?
I believe it's actually just the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You know, just I forget what the actual order is, but you know, there's like a Catholic order that kind of maintains a lot of the holy spaces. And so this is just looking on the inside. You can see into the house from above. And then, you know, amongst the stones here, you also have the synagogue where Jesus was thought to have preached. Now, you can see the difference between the white rock and the black rock. So the white rock actually is, that was expanded on.
Is that limestone?
That's limestone,
Versus
yeah.
the black, which is
Basalt, yeah. And so this actually was built on top of an older synagogue where Jesus did his ministry. And so this dates back to 5th century as well.
newer ruins.
The newer ruins on top of the older ruins, exactly. Okay, and then we went to the Mount of Beatitudes after that, which is adjacent to Capernaum. So it's just to the northwest. And not exactly a huge mountain, but, you know, we were talking 2 weeks ago, you know, that, you know, they would use these surroundings to, you know, to amplify, you know, their voice, you know, use the acoustics. And I think we decided Jesus probably was standing at the bottom and then preaching upwards, but, you know, hard to say. But yeah, so we talked about the Beatitudes, and basically it was Jesus' reinterpretation of the Ten Commandments that Moses had provided for the Jewish people. You know, they were trying to draw comparisons. So Moses had went up the mountain, you know, to get the Ten Commandments from God on Mount Sinai, and then Jesus, you know, went up on the mount and basically reinterpreted the commandments, saying that, you know, he came not to destroy but to fulfill, you know, the law and the prophets. And we also talked just a little bit about some of the other sermons that he had. You know, Matthew 5:39 talks about, you know, slapping. You know, if someone were to slap you on the right cheek, that you should offer your left. And basically that was just another way of saying, well, if most people are right-handed and they're going to be hitting you, they're typically going to be hitting you on the left cheek, or on the left cheek. And so, you know, to accomplish hitting you on the right cheek, you'd have to back slap somebody. And so backslapping typically is what you would see with a master and their servant. And so it's just another way of saying that we should all be servants to one another. And then we also talked a little bit about Roman impressment law. Jesus saying, go the second mile. And so if a Roman soldier says that you should carry their equipment for a mile, Jesus said you should take it for 2. And, in some ways that could be considered to be a way of rebellion, against the Roman rulers. But in some ways, if you're going to be pushing on beyond what they expect of you, they're going to be asking you why. And so, they'll say, oh, well, because my master had told me to do so. And so they would say, oh, well, who's your master? Oh, Jesus is my master. Well, who's Jesus? And so it was another way for Jesus to, spread his message and, be able to, expand his ministry. From there, we went to the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee is known by many names throughout the Old and New Testament. And we know that it's the lowest freshwater lake on earth. Primary source is the Jordan River. Talked about, the calming of the storm and the walking on the water. For the most part, the sea itself is a pretty calm sea. While we were there, there wasn't really a whole lot of crazy waves. But we know that there are periods of time where, the wind, as it comes over the eastern mountains, you'll get that cold air mixing with the warm air over the lake, and then it can create these very violent storms. And so we watched part of a video that kind of, they were able to take some footage of some storms that had come through. I think there was one 10 years ago and maybe one 20 years ago, but you could see how violent, the waters would become. And you could see why, if you were out on the lake, especially in a primitive boat back then, and you got waves, 20 feet waves crashing over you, yeah, you'd be afraid. At least I would be afraid, that, that you could easily fall out of the boat and drown, in those types of conditions. So yeah, if I think people have access to this, you could certainly watch those videos. But we were able to go out in the boat as well, and yeah, as you can see, very nice, calm, sunny day. So yeah, it was a great time. And then we also talked a little bit more about the eastern side, which typically was more associated with, more of a Gentile area. And that's where Jesus had gotten out of the boat and came across a person that had many demons inside of them, called themselves Legion. And Jesus was able to banish those demons into a herd of swine that eventually ran off a cliff into the water. And so you can kind of see, the cliffs that he might have been talking about, on the eastern side there. And then from there, then we went to Tabgha, which is southwest of Capernaum. And this is where it is thought that he had fed the masses. And so there's two specific stories, one feeding the 5,000 and one feeding the 4,000. And from there, we talked about potential meaning between the number of baskets left over, from each of those feedings. 5,000 were fed with 5 loaves and 2 fish. There was 12 baskets of full of pieces of bread and fish left over from the 5,000. And then the 4,000 were fed with 7 loaves and a few small fish. And from that, there was 7 large baskets of leftover pieces. And so we talked a little bit about Well, Mark said that let the children be fed first because it isn't right to take children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And that was in response to a woman that was pleading to Jesus to come in and heal her. And she replied to Jesus, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat, the children's crumbs. And so they went on to talk about, well, the 12 baskets from the 5,000 could represent the yield for the 12 tribes of Israel. They were first served the bread in the Old Covenant, and then the 7 baskets, they were fed afterwards. They could represent the yield for the 7 Gentile nations that occupied the Promised Land during the time of Moses. And Deuteronomy 7:1 talks about the Hethites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Pezerites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, all 7 nations more numerous and more powerful than you. And so, the children were fed first, but the crumbs fall, to the dogs. The dogs are the Gentiles, and so, they eat second. And, basically the whole idea is that we're bringing, Jesus is here to bring the bread. He's the bread, bringing the Gentiles into covenant with God. So yeah, just some potential, hidden meanings, among all those numbers. And so on top of that, this area here, there's a church that was built. Now, this actually, even though it is a modern church, this actually was rebuilt in the same image as to the early church that was built there. And so the earliest building here was a small chapel built in the 4th century. And it was later expanded into a monastery in the 5th century, which was later destroyed either by Arabs or by Persians. And so they rediscovered the church area in 1923, and it was restored to its Byzantine form. And so there's actually quite a few original mosaics within there. And yeah, under the altar, so
that's the one they discovered in 23, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the fish and the bread right in front of the rock here, they surmise based on the location here that that's likely where they thought Jesus had stood when he multiplied the loaves and the fish. And so everything was built around that. But yeah, you can see just the intricate detail of the mosaics. All right, and that brings everybody up to speed. Does anybody have any specific questions? I know that was, I meant to try to do it fast, but okay. All right, so from, we can see Magdala, that's another name for Tabgitha. Oh, I'm sorry, Tabgitha is actually right there. But interestingly, that actually is another name for Tabgitha. So together, I would assume that would be the same town. But yeah, from there, we're going to be going up to Caesarea Philippi. And this area was a, oh, you'll see on the pictures here. This is certainly considered to be a holy land. And the reason for that is it's actually one of the main sources of the Jordan River. You have Mount Hammond just above that, and so a lot of the rainfall that comes down, will drain off of the rocks, and so there's actually an underground spring that will come up and start to feed into the Jordan here, and so this is one of the 3 main sources of the Jordan. But you can see there's actually a deep enclave where people would surmise that because you can't really see the bottom, how deep it goes, that could be an entrance to the underworld or to hell. So the earliest foundations that were built up here actually were designed to, I think it was to worship Baal, which is why it's otherwise known as Baal Hermon or Hermon, which also gets its name from the mountain that's there, or Baal Gad. Those are names that were referenced in the Old Testament. And from there, actually, I think it was the Greeks that came in, that conquered and said, well, if this was good for, the people that were previously worshiping here, well, it should be good for our gods as well. So, they destroyed, and then they started building up. And so we actually see that there's a temple for the Greek god Pan. And so this location is also known as Panias. I thought I had on here what Pan was supposed to be a god of, but I guess I did not add that.
Out of the kitchen.
Yeah.
He is the god of the wild, shepherds and flocks, rustic music, and promptus and companion of the nymphs.
Oh, there we
He
go.
was also a close friend of Dionysus, which is the god of wine and intoxication. So there was quite a bit.
Pan is the party
He
companion.
was, yes.
So they had a lot of
He
parties
was the
here.
Bobby Flay's god.
So yeah, and you can see some of the remnants of the old temples that were constructed here. And in fact, this area here, which is adjacent to that, that cave, this actually was just unearthed within the last 5 years. And they actually just started digging up here because, during the pandemic, there really wasn't a whole lot of tourism. And they said, oh, this is a great time to open things up and start to dig around and see what else is there. And so, yeah, you can see there's structures underneath here as well.
Is the jury still out on if it's in the portal of the underworld?
I'm not sure how deep that goes, but it goes in there.
When I think of Caesarea Philippi, I always pictured like a really bustling city, like a really built-up urban area. And so it's kind of a contrast. This looks more like a desert oasis than what my brain had manufactured.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting, because we know it as Caesarea Philippi because once Herod died, he passed on his land to his sons, and so there was his son Philippus that took over the northern part, and so Philippus actually took this area and established that as his seat of rule. And so that's why it was, renamed that. But as for, a more modern city, I'm not sure. It might be on the other side of the mountain. But talking about the scripture here, if somebody could read Matthew 16. Oh, did I? Oh, yeah.
It's fine, I got it on my phone.
16:13.
Yeah.
It says, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he began asking his disciples, saying, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon
Bar-Jonah.
Barjona, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not overpower it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then he warned the disciples that they should tell no one that he was the Christ.
Great, thank you.
So does tradition say he was in that spot that you just showed us?
Uh,
How big is the region of Caesarea Philippi?
oh, it's actually, it has the feel of like a state park or a national park, because you drive in, there's a parking area, and then you start to kind of walk up some trails, to get to this area here. And so it actually is more, well, it's like a nature preserve. But yeah, as of where this specifically happened, anywhere within
There's
this
no
region,
tradition,
no.
sorry. They didn't build the church, really?
Yeah. But yeah, it was a pretty cool area, especially seeing, some of the, just some of that intricate rock etching that had been performed into the surface there. Okay. So from there, Caesarea Philippi, now we're going to be going all the way down to Mount Tabor. Now, Mount Tabor is basically, it's another giant hill, and this one in particular is called a Monadnock, which specifically is an isolated hill or small mountain arising abruptly from gentle sloping or level surrounding ground. And so, yeah, it's really not much of a, it is a nice hill, but not like a huge mountain that you would think. Yeah.
What kind of elevation are we talking about here?
Well, I don't know.
Was it Galilee sea level?
So,
Galilee
was below sea level.
Below
was the lowest lake, right?
Yeah.
Freshwater lake?
Because if you recall from the video that we had watched,
because the Dead Sea's way below.
yeah, the Dead
Or
Sea is
that's
way
what
below.
right?
And so, yeah, I don't know. But yeah.
I thought the Sea of Galilee was below sea.
Yes, that's what I'm pretty sure, because you have the Mediterranean, and then you had some mountain, some hill formations,
Huge amount.
and then,
It says
You
Mount
know-
Tabor is 636 feet high.
Well, that's not very high.
no. Oh, okay.
Like Wisconsin mountains.
Oh, yeah.
That's a ski slope in Wisconsin. No. Same in Michigan.
So not very big, but
Oh, just kidding. Mount Tabor in Portland, Oregon. Let me keep looking.
They call it a mount in Oregon?
It did. Okay, so
Compared-
Mount Tabor in Israel is 1,886 feet.
Oh, okay.
okay, so a little bigger.
It's a little higher.
That's a respectable mount.
Mount Hermon is just over 9,000 feet tall.
Holy cow.
Yeah. But the point is that the area around that particular area is also pretty low, pretty flat. So in comparison, it does look, slightly large, and they actually would use that mountain as a divider, for different territories. And so if we recall the map, of how the different 12 tribes, were, given land, they use that as a dividing point between the three tribes here. So you got the Naphtali, the Ishiyar, and the Naphtali, Ishiyar, and Zebulun. Zebulun.
Zebulun, Issachar, Naphtali.
Naphtali.
Sorry, Doc.
No.
Why doesn't Naphtali ring that bell?
They're all tribes.
I know, but what is it?
Well, this is the geographic area that Jesus is said to have, come into, to do his ministry. So, the point that we're talking about this is thought to be the Mount of Transfiguration. And so if somebody can read Matthew 17, 1 through 13.
Corey's the only one with the Bible.
This is your Bible.
How do you have my Bible?
I don't know. It's got a lot of cheat notes in here, though.
Oh, God.
Must be an old one I stopped writing in.
Matthew 17.
Yes.
Well, that last passage would have had, Matthew 16 would have lots of notes.
It did. That's why it's stumped. That's what got stumped. Sounds like this is not mine.
Faith healing.
Yeah.
6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. That would freak me out. Peter responded and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you want, I will make 3 tabernacles here. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground and were terrified. And Jesus came to them and touched them and said, Get up and do not be afraid. And raising their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. When they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. And his disciples asked him, Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And he answered and said, Elijah is coming and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah already came, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they wanted. So also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist.
So the site of Transfiguration is actually controversial. We don't really know exactly where this had happened. And so the 2 main theories is Mount Tabor would be one, and then Mount Hammond, which we just talked about, would be the other one. And they thought that, well, Mount Hammond would be a very reasonable one because, well, we just talked about Caesarea Philippi, and, this is adjacent, so very likely he went up that mountain. Well,
How far can you walk in 6 days?
so that's the thing, Certainly that's a bigger mountain than Mount Tabor, but 6 days, that's you can go quite a bit of distance, in 6 days. And so, yeah, that was one of the reasons why, well, Mount Tabor is actually 40 miles away. And so if you're going 6 days, if you're averaging 7 miles, with your apostles and with people following you behind, certainly that seems a little more reasonable. In addition to that, this area up here, just like the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, this is actually known to be more, Gentile area. And so we know right after Sarah, finished, that Jesus came down from the mountain and he was met with a large group of people, once again. And so if he was going to come down Mount Hammond, the people that he would have met with would be more, pagan worshipers, Gentiles. The theory is that it's unlikely for a large crowd, that actually was following Jesus to assimilate, down through here. And so this likely would have been more an area that, Jesus would have had, greater influence. So that with the location, that's why they think it's Mount Tabor. And so, the 3 of them, you have Jesus, you got Moses, and you got Elijah. Well, Moses is thought to represent the law, You know, he came down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments. Elijah represents the prophets. And so Jesus was talking with Moses and Elijah, and then they disappeared, leaving only Jesus behind. And so, once again, talking about Jesus fulfilling both the law and the prophets. You know, Matthew 5:17, think not that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. And so, he's basically taking on aspects of both.
Or you could have Moses representing the old covenant, Elijah representing the new covenant, since he was taken away in the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of perspectives.
Different perspectives. You'll find that is
Said
true.
you'd build a church on this one.
So, on the top of Mount Tabor, we have the Church of the Transfiguration. And so the current church, this was completed in 1924 by Antonio Barluzzi, which, if you recall, he was the Italian architect that would take aspects of the Bible and try to incorporate that into, you know, the buildings that he was creating. And so, yeah, he definitely took on his own spin, you know, with this one. So the church actually contains 3 grottos, which obviously would represent the 3 tents or the 3 tabernacles that Peter desired to build, you know, for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. And so as you go in, you know, Jesus is going to be the center, but then you've got Moses on the left-hand side, and then you got Elijah.
Is he holding the law, the tablets?
I believe so. Yeah.
And is that Elijah? Is that the prophets of Baal? Is that a depiction of that?
That I'm not sure,
A consuming fire?
but I would assume so. And in addition to that, so on August 6th, which you know, the Roman Catholics have a calendar that, you know, represents not only the different seasons of the church, but also, you know, they pay homage to different saints. Well, August 6th is the day of Transfiguration. And so the way that this was constructed and how the sun goes around the area, apparently the sun is supposed to strike a glass panel in the floor as it comes through, and it's supposed to cause dispersion, and it's supposed to illuminate the golden background, you know, within the church. And so obviously we weren't there in August, but, you know, that would have been cool to see. Okay.
I wonder what, when I think about that passage, maybe they were encouragement. You knew that you could die.
Hmm.
Because it doesn't say what they said.
Right,
Conversation.
right, yeah. Because it's like, well, what would you talk about? I'm sure, you know, centuries would, you know, have gone by. So I doubt they would have a lot in common.
I think they would have a lot more. They chatted throughout their whole lives. I mean, Jesus is God, and both men commune with God.
Hmm.
It's more of a reunion than a first-time meeting.
Well, you look different.
Yeah.
You look the
Sorry,
beard.
you look like fire.
Yeah.
Lord,
Yeah.
your voice is a little lower.
Or he's like Elijah. He's like, you're waking me up again? You were pissed off when Paul did it, or Saul did it. Now you did it to me.
Yeah, that was Samuel.
Was it Samuel? I thought it was.
Yeah, it was that.
Oh, shoot, you're right. Just kidding. He let
It's
Samuel
okay.
sleep.
It's
That's why
okay.
he called Elijah.
All right, it's just after 11.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
More, please.
So, yeah, I figure that I think we touched on quite a bit today. But yeah, we are next headed to Jericho, which one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world. And there's really not, well, now I'm expanding. But
Did you see the wall that fell down?
the wall that fell
How
down,
did it fall down?
I don't know.
It didn't fall down. It fell down.
Oh, okay, okay.
Didn't fall over, it fell down.
Mm.
Didn't topple, it receded.
But yeah, there's ruins that, the current city is built around, and there's not really much to the ruins, from way back when, but it was still cool to see. What you really see is the palm trees, city of palm trees, because this is actually an oasis city. Where it is located, there's a lot of desert around the area. And so, yeah, this was a common meeting point, especially if you're heading to Jerusalem, to head through the Valley of Death, which we'll talk about as well. But yeah, this is kind of a stopping point, a refresher, get your water, get your food before you continue on your journey. Anyways. All right, would someone like to open us up in prayer? Joe? Okay.
Gracious Father, thank you for the good report from Brother Jeff. We pray that it would help increase our faith. And thank you for bringing us all together today. Help us to prepare ourselves for the next part of our worship and cleanse our hearts. In Jesus' name.